First, I want to say thank you so much for checking out this video. We're going to dive into my continued thesis of why concurrent users don't tell the full story, because I continue to see people use concurrent users as the be-all end-all metrics. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to show you how in this video we actually calculate the monthly active users, the users who are playing, but not all at the same time. And I feel like we can get to that from the data that is actually provided. And there's some really awesome statistics that I think you're going to get out of this video. Now, I'm going to take a note from Devin Nash, and I'm going to use two amazing tools here at my disposal, Notepad and my calculator here, but we're going to be using a couple of different tools that you can easily find online so you can check this math out for yourself. Ideally, at the end of this, you're going to have a rough formula for estimating the MAU, the MAUs, the monthly active users for your favorite game or any game, as it facilitates online discussion and hopefully to help educate people on what CCU means and what you can really gain from it and what I see people use it for, which I see more often than not used incorrectly. And so that's what this video is going to be about. Now, as an experiment, just as a PSA, because we are going to talk about four main games here: Final Fantasy XIV, Elden Ring, Lost Ark, and finally New World, because I think this data really is important. We're also going to factor out what are called the experts or the professionals, and we're going to use some data that I have also at my disposal here in this video as well. And again, I think you can actually get all this data online pretty much for free. So feel free, again, to check my math. However, just as an experiment, if you guys haven't seen PSA, New World this weekend is actually going to be free to play. They are saying that the game can be downloaded for free and played over the course of Steam, and it's going to also be on sale. We could even maybe start to theorize about how much they've actually sold. And so you can sound off in the comments below how many millions of copies you think New World sold. I'd love to check your estimates versus my estimates here at the end of the video so we can kind of like compare notes as well. And that's what this video is clearly going to be about. I'm going to really ask you to hit that smash button, like that smash button for me on this channel. Really helps the channel out. I'm not, YouTube reminds me, I'm not doing a good job with my call to actions with subscribers and with the likes. So if you guys hit that like button, thank you so much. If you don't, no worries. I just wanted to make sure that I put that in the front of the video, standard YouTube stuff. Also, specifically, if you're looking for Final Fantasy directed content or New World content, I've got links in the pinned comment for you guys to go check out the dedicated channels in which that I cover like the core news, guides, so much more in massive amounts of detail. And this is more, a bigger channel where I stream and I, cover content and subjects like this. So hello, everyone. Welcome to the channel. My name is Brian if you're new. Let's go ahead and dive in. Why I've continued to be on this kind of tirade about CCU is that, again, I see people using it as saying that represents the player population. And CCU has value, but I think gamers have overvalued it to a degree where it's ended up using it as a club. And I'm going to show and hopefully prove that for you guys in today's video. So if we bring out my trusty notepad here, and I'm going to go ahead and kind of resize it here so we can fit everything on the screen. You'll notice already on the notepad, I got this concept called hours, and that's where we're going to come into it. Lost Ark peak CCU, we'll start with them, at over the last 30 days at 828,803. And then hours over the last 30 days, and you can also get it granular more than this. Lost Ark is coming in at 276,694,107. And from here, and so Elden Ring, let's go ahead and use that. Now, Elden Ring, a different genre of game, but I'm going to use this to highlight a lot of stuff here. 822, and then 803 in terms of its peak concurrency. And then essentially, again, trending over 30 days. The hours in and of itself, guys, if you just wanted to know something that is just mind-boggling, if you look at the amount of hours played by Elden Ring over the last 30 days, 330 million. Now, we'll jump into, let's go pick on a New World here real quick, because we'll just kind of gather these core numbers, so I don't have to necessarily jump around the screen too much for you guys. But New World's peak concurrent recently just increased. And if I find it number 44 right now, 37,172. And then in terms of hours played, we've got 15,580,584 and 862. So those are the hours. Now, if we look at Final Fantasy XIV, now Final Fantasy XIV literally is only trackable from the Steam perspective here But this is where I think Final Fantasy 14 fans will be massively excited to kind of see some numbers that we can start to extrapolate from this. So Final Fantasy 14 online, 31 peak, 826. And this number, I think you're going to see some massive growth in Final Fantasy 14 this year. And yeah, we'll talk about more of that later. 13, 6, 8, 1, 7, 9, 6. Now, I always get a comment, like, oh, but Steam only represents a small fraction of the overall player populate. Yes, this isn't me using these numbers to say that anything's wrong with the game. This is me telling you, like, holy, let me just, like, this is holy, it's crazy, right? I'll just self-bleep in that case, because you're going to, I find this exciting, but then again, I'm a huge nerd, and that's just how it is. Okay, so we've got some core numbers. And we've got our numbers overall, and that's going to be where we're going to get started here in terms of our calculation. Where is our averaging coming from? Well, according to market research, gamers play an average of 7 hours, 7 minutes a week. Gamers on average. Now, like if we jump into market research itself, we can actually start to extrapolate based off your age, based off your location, based off of overall 28 to 2019. That's the current data that we have. Obviously, the pandemic will have increased this, right? And so again, 7 hours, 7 minutes on average per gamer. Now, we're talking about MMORPGs here. I think MMO players play longer. It's like runners do it longer. MMO players do it longer. Is a shirt that I should make at some point. Somebody had a shirt like that in college for the runner team, and it's always stuck with me because of its obviously it's crude humor. But if you think about MMO players, they do it longer. And so let's go ahead and just give a little grace and say 10 hours a week, which roughly is going to translate into if you think of 4 weeks, 40 hours a week of game time. Now, we're going to have some outliers. You're going to have the professionals, and they're roughly going to end up playing, I would say, like if you think of a professional, 40 hours a week, which essentially would put it around, 120, 40, 80, 120, 160 hours a month in terms of that. So what percentage of the player base is considered professional? And this applies across the board. So obviously I have some numbers about that, so we can start to extrapolate that kind of professionality in terms of streaming and that. So obviously the professional versus the average player is something that is interesting to me. And we actually have data on that. Like I said, this is a lot of data, a lot of something to talk about. Overall, you can see casual and novice players make up the vast majority. In terms of what they consider expert and aspiring professional, that represents roughly like a quarter of the gaming population in terms of male. In terms of female, much less, but that's just essentially kind of the split. We could probably do a deep dive and talk about that and essentially how that might be changing in the future. Who knows? But at its core, that's the kind of the numbers we wanted to start with. And let's go ahead and actually dive into some calculations, right? So in terms of hours played, we'll start with Lost Ark, 276,694,107. It's a lot of hours over 30 days. So if we figure out, based off the average, adjusting for MMOs players doing longer, at 40 hours a week, we can now divide this by 40. Now, again, this is on average. You can scale this up higher and scale this down lower. And basically what we're going to be doing is looking for a range. I'll let you guys kind of have and figure out what you feel is the biggest range. Now, remember, if you, I said per week, per month. Month. It's like 40 hours per week is a full-time job. Now, 10 hours a week is a hobby. And then so if you kind of go into that range, if all of a sudden, let's say you push it up to 12 hours a week, all of a sudden you're going to start looking at some interesting numbers. You'll get some really cool ranges, but that's what we're looking for. 40 hours for the month divided by the average month of hours, you're looking at for Lost Ark, 6.9 million MAUs. And I think that's a lot, and so that's obviously Lost Ark. Maybe there's bots. So again, let's say that's the 40 hour. That's the high end. Let's say somebody's over consuming, just to give you guys this range. So again, let's take our 276,694,007, and let's divide that. Let's go ahead and say 100. Oh, no. Let's look at our, everybody's not professional. So let's factor in, let's say people are over consuming. They're excited at 100 100 hours a month played. And there are people who are doing this, right? 2.7. So our range, 2.7 million. To 6.9. So that's roughly your monthly active users for that game. Let's go ahead and dive in. Actually, I said the peak concurrent, right? The equation seems to be anywhere from 7 to 11 multiplier concurrent. So let's go ahead and do it. 828,803. Let's times that by, let's say 7. And all of a sudden you get 5.8 million MAUs right within our hours range, So 7 to 11 multiplier of concurrent is essentially what we're going to end up dealing with here. All right, let's go ahead and clear this out. Let's go ahead and look at Elden Ring now, shall we? So Elden Ring, 330, and this is massive numbers, right? 199, 24, and don't worry, guys, we're going to jump into how to find the professionals within the number range and what kind of percentage they actually make up. It's not that massive, but it's still, I think, an important thing to factor in. Also, we could again talk about bots within Lost Ark, and I've even heard of people trying to farm up stuff within Elden Ring and sell it to you. I got approached by a couple people. I turned them down because that's just what I do. All right, let's go ahead and take our 40 hours on average for the month. And so Elden Ring MAU, it looks like 8.2 million, and that's our high end. And so again, if we look, let's just take our 100. Let's take our 100 hours. So that was 333, 330, 199, and 249. And let's go ahead and divide that by 100. And again, 100's a lot of hours, guys. 3.3. So 3.3 M to 8.2 million MAUs. So again, let's say 100 divided by 4. Like, that's a part-time job. We're talking about people with a part-time job hours a week playing a game. Obviously, there's going to be fluctuation in dates. That's why we're looking at it in the course of a range of 30 days. Let's talk about our Final Fantasy. Let's talk about Final Fantasy because I think it's really important. 13 million hours, and this is again on Steam. We don't know the other numbers out there, but you know that there are a bunch of people playing Final Fantasy 14. Maybe not today, but again, it's kind of a cycle. Let's take a look at our 40 hours. So on Steam alone, 350K, so 342K MAU on the high end. If we're talking about our 14 players, whoever maybe consume on average, 13, 6, 8, 1, 7, 9, 6, and then we divide that by 100, and you're looking at 1.3136K. And that's just one piece of the platform, right? Yoshi P designed 14 to run off of 300K subs, just 300K subs. So already just on Steam alone, I think that they're definitely crushing it. And then whatever that multiplier ends up being, because Steam ended up coming later, so more people have the PC version, like myself, PlayStation version, oh my gosh, like this number should get you massively excited for the future of Final Fantasy 14, and Square Enix saying they'll spare no expense. Massive numbers. All right, let's do our New World. What essentially kind of where I was like, somebody was like, New World only has like 20,000 players playing. It's like, well, let's actually figure this out in terms of hours, because if we figure out how many, if it is truly, like if CCU is truly the number to measure off of, people have to be massively consuming this game. And that's kind of what I want to show you. And then we'll talk about our professionals here. All right. So again, let's divide it by our 40. And you can see New World at 3,389K. And that's on the high end. Let's talk about our over consumers and kind of get our range. So that was again 15,584,862. And then let's go ahead and divide this by our over consumers for 100 hours a month. So 155K to 389K monthly active users for New World concurrently. Now, that what's going to be really interesting to see is with the changes, do these numbers go up, and how do they ultimately end up settling down and fluctuating, and what does that ultimate community look like? So I think, again, you can see here from the CCU perspective. Let's go ahead and see if it applies here on New World with the 7 to 11, 172. In terms of our monthly active, let's times that by 7, and it's right within the range. If we times it by 11 in this case, just for math and fun and funsies, we can see here 37172 times by 11 on the high end, 408,000, which falls right outside that range in terms of monthly active users, in terms of consumption. But obviously not everybody plays the same. That's why it ends up being overall averaging out. We're giving a little bit more hours into it, so these numbers I think could easily scale up massively, especially for Lost Ark, Elden Ring, and Final Fantasy. So now that we have that, how do we figure out who the hell is our professionals? And I think that kind of drives us into streams charts here. And you could see here, like looking at Final Fantasy 14, looking at New World, looking at Lost Ark and Elden Ring, like I can see within this data what is all happening. Now, personally speaking, I'm going to go ahead and just use average channels to kind of figure out overall who are our professionals, because if you start to look at peak channels, clearly that's going to be hype and that's going to have different values. So overall, the course of the lifetime, that's where we're essentially kind of getting this data and going from there. Now, in this case, let's go ahead and start with Final Fantasy 14 in terms of average channels over the course of March, 408. Now, not all of these are professionals, but you can start to see as just where you're sitting here looking at that MAU. If we sit in here and say, hey, Final Fantasy 14, average of 408 channels, they're streaming. That means they're playing themselves. So roughly you could think that per week, if they're full-time at this, which the average channels isn't going to represent the full-time, but it's going to represent a percentage of that, you're going to start to see those who are playing 160 hours a month, like on a full-time basis or more, is going to represent essentially like a cut of that, right? So 408 average channels. One second, I hear the kids. Being that the kids are now playing upstairs, just heads up, you might hear some of them playing, or hopefully not fighting in the background. But anyway, let's say like if you're looking at 408 average channels, let's go ahead and just, let's just go ahead and keep it at that. 408. Let's bring up my trusty calculator here. 408. If these are the full timers, 160 hours represents, in this case, for Final Fantasy, 6,500 hours. So what you would do in this case is that you would take the 15 million and you would minus 65 from that, and then all of a sudden you have your average player pool. You can clearly see minus 15 million or 13 million minus 65,000 ain't gonna make a dent. Like, it's not gonna make a dent. So when it comes to the full-time streamer cutout, they're not representative of essentially the whole. If we look at in this case New World, 106 on average. So again, nothing in the regards. Lost Ark on average is really kind of interesting in terms of average channels over the course of that. I don't think obviously 1,400 people or 1,500 people making their livelihood streaming New World or Lost Ark, but clearly that's the math that I am getting to in the conclusion. Elden Ring, man, like look at this. This is awesome. This is massive. This is so interesting in terms of numbers and what it means for players. And so in terms of that, when we look at the monthly active user, let's go back to our core numbers. Sail through. All right. So if our peak is essentially the, if we're going to use that and use our for monthly active users, let's go for the all-time highs in this regards. So I think we actually already calculated that in terms of peak. Let me just verify that in a sense, because it looks like, okay, peak here in the last 30 days. If we actually have to go into the game itself to find its personal all-time high. Now, sail through on Lost Ark, not going to be the most realistic because it is also a free-to-play game, so we don't necessarily know if it is sold in terms of that. But let's go ahead and take peak all-time, massive numbers, right? So again, obviously hype is going to be a factor in it, but let's just start with the number here and then we'll kind of scale down. And that way we can ultimately guess. So let's go ahead and multiply this by our 7 in terms of our concurrent, and that puts us at 6.6 million. We know that they've clearly sold over 12 million at last reported. 9,52523 times, what's our 11? What's that equal out? Very, very close. It's very, very close for Elden Ring. Let's jump into which one was on this one. Final Fantasy. Now, Final Fantasy, we know they're on their way to 30 million. They're 30 million, but what have they sold on Steam based off of this number alone? 95102 times. Let's go ahead and keep it with our 11. Over 1 million copies on Steam. I would venture to bet that's much higher. Like, I would just easily put it, just in terms of Steam numbers, easily much higher. All right, now that we're having some fun, let's go back, let's look at New World, and then we'll kind of wrap up the video. And I thank you guys so much for you who've hung out with me thus far. If you made it already to this end, I want to know, what do you think? What do you think it ultimately is going to be? 913027 times our 11 multiplier at 10 million copies. Now, again, that was the all-time high. Let's say that was just, let's just divide that by 2. Like, let's say that's just half hype. You know, you got 5 million copies right out the gate. How many do you think they've sold and continue to sell? It's going to be a curious thing. And I think this weekend is ultimately going to be massively fascinating in terms of what it means for these games. Hopefully this video in and of itself shows what you can use CCU for. But when I see people using it as the be-all end-all metric, that's where I just I come up with different numbers. I come up with different ideas. The argument could be, is 155K to, you know, or 389K the right number? Is that a good number? Is that a number that you can be proud of? I would love that number, but obviously this is Amazon. I think they're definitely going to want more. I think Final Fantasy 14 is crushing it because what percentage of Steam represents the overall player base? I would think it would still be fairly low, representing, you know, if they're at, you know, last 26 million and, you know, we can estimate 1 million from Steam, then they would represent, well, what percentage of 26 to 1? There's your ratio. I guess I could figure it out with a calculator, but we're not going to do it because I think this video has been long enough. So you could clearly see some massive growth, some insane numbers, and hopefully you got something good out of this video. I thank you so much for being here. Love you faces. Hopefully I'll see you in my next one. But until then, take care.
Yeah. It's time to chill out on the couch and read some comments. That's right. You know me when it comes to destiny. I'm off with the clan, and I'm glad you're feeling better. Oh yeah.